Throughout history, humanity has never stopped fighting not only to defend its lands but to prove its intelligence, courage, and will to survive. Every battle carries untold stories, bold strategies, fatal mistakes, and moments that change the course of the world. Here on Military Tactics Channel, we revisit those pages of history to understand why sometimes a single decision can create a legend. Let's begin today's story. On July 12, 1943, the fields near Prokhorovka witnessed what had long been claimed to be one of the largest tank battles in history. However, recent research reveals that the legendary clash was far from the truth portrayed in popular history books. The roar of over 800 tanks echoed across the Prokhorovka fields. On July 12, 1943, during the height of the Eastern Front in World War II, this region near Prokhorovka became the stage for what has been popularly recorded as one of the grandest tank engagements in military history. The traditional narrative portrays this battle as a massive armored clash involving hundreds of tanks from the German Wehrmacht and the Soviet Red Army, highlighting it as a pivotal turning point in the Battle of Kursk. According to these accounts, this colossal confrontation halted the Nazi advance into the Soviet Union, thus playing a crucial role in the broader context of the war. Looking into the specifics, the German forces involved were primarily from the 2nd SS Panzer Corps, which included notable divisions such as the SS Division Leibstandarte, SS Division Das Reich, and SS Division Totenkopf. These were elite units equipped with a formidable array of tanks, including the new Panther tanks and the heavy Tiger tanks. On the opposing side, the Soviet forces consisted of elements from the 5th Guards Tank Army and the 5th Guards Army, under the command of Lieutenant General Alexei Zhadov and Lieutenant General Pavel Rotmistrov. These units were a mix of seasoned and newly formed divisions, significantly reinforced by 34 tanks and several heavier KV series tanks. The scale and intensity of the battle, as traditionally described, have long been a source of awe, with each side reportedly committing around 400 to 500 tanks in a direct and chaotic confrontation. Eyewitness accounts from soldiers such as Soviet tank commander Mikhail Kalashnikov, who later invented the AK-47 rifle, emphasized the fierce, close-range nature of the battle, with tanks often dueling within only a few hundred meters of each other. However, this widely accepted historical narrative, woven largely from post-war Soviet accounts and embellished Western retellings, has been significantly challenged by recent research. With the stage set, let us delve into the myths and realities surrounding the reported tank numbers in this epic confrontation. Modern investigations into the battle, including archival discoveries and battlefield archaeological studies, suggest that the actual number of tanks involved was considerably lower than previously claimed. For instance, detailed Soviet operational records and German after-action reports indicate that the true number of tanks engaged in direct combat was closer to 200 on each side. This stark discrepancy raises serious questions about the historical accuracy of the traditional narrative. Furthermore, these examinations reveal that the strategic impact of the battle, while undeniably significant, was different in nature from the decisive, war-turning clash it was once portrayed to be. Rather than a clear-cut victory, the encounter at Prokhorovka was, in truth, a brutal and bloody stalemate, marked by heavy losses on both sides. This interpretation is supported by accounts from participants such as German tank officer Kurt Meyer, who described the battle as a hell of blood and fire, where neither side gained a definitive upper hand. As we move forward, this exploration will draw upon more first-hand experiences and newly analyzed data to challenge and redefine the long-established myths surrounding the Battle of Prokhorovka. The focus will not only be on correcting the exaggerated tank numbers, but also on understanding the true tactical and strategic outcomes of the confrontation. This reevaluation does not diminish the bravery and sacrifice of the soldiers involved. Rather, it seeks to honor their memory through an accurate historical account of their efforts and the harsh circumstances they endured. When examining the Battle of Prokhorovka more closely, one of the most significant clashes on July 12, 1943, during the larger Battle of Kursk, historical accounts have traditionally depicted a massive engagement involving upward of 1,000 tanks. However, recent academic scrutiny, based on a meticulous review of German and Soviet archival sources, paints a very different picture. These archives indicate that the Soviet forces committed about 500 tanks to the battle, while the Germans deployed around 300. The inflated figure of 1,000 tanks, often cited in many historical narratives, appears to have originated from wartime propaganda and early post-war accounts intended to magnify the scale of the engagement. A critical analysis of battlefield reports from both sides reveals a significant discrepancy between the initial claims and the actual verified losses. Soviet records that once boasted of destroying as many as 400 German tanks have since been significantly revised downward. According to archival recovery documents and maintenance logs, German tank losses were closer to 80, while the Soviets lost approximately 300. Historian Valery Zamelin, in his detailed study of the battle, cites these records to challenge the exaggerated claims that have long dominated popular history. Zamelin's findings are corroborated by other scholars, such as Karl-Heinz Frieser, who, in his book The Blitzkrieg Legend, reveals that logistical and tactical field reports from the German side recorded far fewer tank engagements than previously reported. Moreover, first-hand accounts from participants also portray a more limited and restrained picture of the battle's true scale. German tank commander Otto Carius recounted in his memoirs the intense but localized nature of the fighting, noting that the vast fields once imagined to be swarming with tanks were, in reality, less crowded and more strategically contested than overrun. On the Soviet side, tanker Dmitry Loza recalled the chaos and heavy toll of aggressive Soviet tactics, which resulted in significant tank losses, caused more by superior German firepower and tactical positioning than by the sheer scale of the engagement. The misrepresentation of the tank numbers and the resulting exaggerated portrayal of the battle have also distorted perceptions of its tactical significance. Modern military historians, such as David Glantz, argue that while Prokhorovka was indeed a critical moment in the Battle of Kursk, its strategic impact has been overstated. The true tactical turning point came from the attritional nature of the broader Kursk campaign, which gradually wore down German operational capabilities rather than stemming from a single day's dramatic confrontation. Understanding the actual numbers involved in the Battle of Prokhorovka allows for a clearer assessment of its outcomes. The Soviet Red Army, despite suffering heavier tank losses, succeeded in exhausting the Wehrmacht's spearhead divisions, contributing significantly to the eventual German withdrawal from the Kursk salient. This reevaluation shifts the focus toward the resilience and strategic endurance of the Soviet forces rather than the overstated myth of a gargantuan tank battle. In sum, by revisiting archival materials, reassessing eyewitness accounts, and applying rigorous scholarly analysis, the historical understanding of Prokhorovka has been significantly reshaped. Although the clash remains a powerful symbol of Soviet tenacity and bravery, its true scale and impact are now seen through a more accurate, though less sensational lens. This correction helps not only to honor the true nature of the soldiers' sacrifice, but also to deepen our understanding of the broader strategic maneuvers on the Eastern Front during World War II. As we examine the tactical dynamics of Prokhorovka, it is important to understand the strategies employed by both the German and Soviet forces. The Germans, under the command of General Hermann Hoth, aimed to break through the southern flank of the Soviet defenses, with the elite SS Panzer Corps delivering a decisive strike intended to encircle the Soviet forces. In contrast, the Soviets, led by Marshal Nikolai Vatutin, launched a massive counteroffensive involving nearly 850 tanks, including 34s and the newly introduced heavy KV tanks. This counteroffensive was more than just a direct confrontation, it was a calculated strategic maneuver intended to halt the German advance and deplete their operational strength. The battle that took place on July 12, 1943, was not merely a clash of tanks, but a complex contest of maneuvers and countermaneuvers. The Germans initially made notable advances but were ultimately halted by the depth and resilience of the Soviet defensive lines. Soviet tactics, heavily based on the concept of maskirovka, military deception, involved the construction of extensive defensive works that were skillfully camouflaged, effectively misleading German intelligence. This strategic depth enabled the Soviets to absorb the initial German assaults and then respond with overwhelming force. The sheer volume of Soviet armor, launched in relentless waves of counterattacks, ultimately compelled the Germans to shift into defensive positions. The impact of Prokhorovka on Operation Citadel, the broader German offensive aimed at Kursk, was profound. Historically portrayed as a monumental clash of armor, modern analysis reveals that Prokhorovka was indeed critical, but not necessarily for the reasons traditionally described. While tank losses on both sides were substantial, they did not reach the enormous figures often cited. Recent research indicates that German tank losses were around 80 to 100, while Soviet losses were considerably higher, though not the catastrophic numbers once claimed. This recalibration of data shifts the narrative from one of sheer destruction to a more nuanced understanding of tactical withdrawal and attritional warfare as practiced by the Soviets. This reassessment highlights a broader strategic reality. Operation Citadel was halted not solely because of the tank losses at Prokhorovka, but due to the unsustainable attrition suffered across the entire Kursk salient. The Soviets had constructed in-depth defenses that extended far beyond this single battle, consisting of multiple layers of fortified zones that steadily drained the Germans of their offensive strength. This extensive preparation, combined with well-positioned strategic reserves, enabled the Red Army not only to absorb the German assaults, but also to prepare for subsequent large-scale offensives, most notably Operation Kutuzov and Operation Polkovodets-Rumiantsev, which would reclaim lost territories and drive the Germans back. Revisiting Prokhorovka through the lens of accurate historical data and first-hand accounts, such as those from Soviet tank commander Dmitry Loza, who described the harrowing intensity of the tank battles and the desperate conditions faced by the crews, offers a far more grounded and realistic understanding of the conflict. Loza's descriptions of the battlefield filled with the deafening clash of armor, the sight of burning tanks, and the unyielding determination of the crew members add a deeply human dimension to this tactical analysis. These accounts do more than recount losses. They illuminate the resilience and bravery of individuals amid chaos. In conclusion, the Battle of Prokhorovka holds a vital place in military history not because of the exaggerated myths of massive tank casualties, but because it marks a turning point where tactical ingenuity, strategic depth, and human courage converged. This battle exemplified the complexity of the Eastern Front and underscored the immense sacrifices that were made. By understanding these elements, we honor not merely the narrative of numbers, but the enduring spirit of those who fought. At Prokhorovka, amid the roar of tanks and the thunder of gunfire, soldiers from both the German and Soviet sides endured harrowing ordeals, their stories painting a vivid and sobering portrait of the battle's brutal reality. One such account comes from Soviet tank commander Mikhail Petrov, who recalled steering his 34 across a field strewn with the charred wrecks of German Panthers on July 12, 1943. Petrov described a terrifying moment when a nearby explosion lifted his tank off the ground, yet he and his crew survived, only to plunge once more into the inferno of battle. His narrative stands in stark contrast to the grandiose claims of hundreds of enemy tanks destroyed, instead emphasizing the chaos and narrow escapes endured by individual soldiers. Similarly, from the German perspective, infantryman Klaus Richter recalled his terror as Soviet shells rained down on their positions near Hill 252.2. The ground shook, and each explosion felt like it could be my last, Richter wrote in a letter dated July 14, 1943. His narrative stands in stark contrast to the grandiose claims of hundreds of enemy tanks destroyed, instead emphasizing the chaos and narrow escapes endured by individual soldiers. Similarly, from the German perspective, infantryman Klaus Richter recalled his terror as Soviet shells rained down on their positions near Hill 252.2. The ground shook, and each explosion felt like it could be my last, Richter wrote in a letter dated July 14, 1943. The accounts of Petrov and Richter are complemented by those of medical personnel who witnessed the aftermath of the battle. Soviet nurse Anna Kosova, stationed at a makeshift field hospital, described the evening following the clash as an endless night of moaning. On July 13th, she recorded more than 200 severely wounded soldiers, brought in within just a few hours, many of them barely 20 years old. Her diary entries mourn the loss of young lives and the deep physical and emotional scars carried by the survivors, offering a poignant glimpse into the human cost of the conflict. In stark contrast to these personal horrors, the official Soviet report declared a resounding victory, claiming that the Red Army had destroyed around 500 German tanks. However, modern research and battlefield excavations have revealed that the real numbers were significantly lower, exposing a striking discrepancy between the soldiers' lived experiences and the triumphant narratives promoted by both sides. Historian Alexei Ivanov, in his 1998 analysis of the battle, suggests that such inflated figures were used to boost morale and to portray the Soviet response as a symbol of national resilience. The disparity between the historical portrayal and the personal experiences at Prokhorovka speaks volumes about the complexity of war. While official records and popular retellings emphasize strategic outcomes and statistics, the stories of individuals like Petrov, Richter, and Kosova remind us of the true essence of battle defined by human struggle, courage, and suffering. These first-hand accounts challenge the mythologized narrative, offering a more nuanced understanding of one of World War II's fiercest confrontations. With both the personal stories and the strategic impacts examined, one may ask, what is the lasting legacy of this mythologized battle? The true legacy lies not merely in its strategic importance or in the number of tanks destroyed, but in the resilience and bravery of the individuals who fought, endured, and remembered. Their accounts allow us to see beyond the fog of war and the myths that have long obscured the truth, helping us recognize the genuine human efforts and sacrifices made at Prokhorovka. They ensure that the lessons learned and the lives lost are not merely relegated to footnotes in history books, but are remembered and honored in all their tragic and heroic dimensions. The myth of Prokhorovka has profoundly shaped historical narratives and public memory, often overshadowing the complex realities of the Eastern Front during World War II. For decades, the battle was portrayed as one of the largest tank engagements in history, with claims that hundreds of tanks were destroyed in a single day. This depiction helped shape a heroic Soviet narrative of the Great Patriotic War, emphasizing the Red Army's strength, resilience, and sacrifice. However, recent research, including archival studies by historians such as Valery Zamelin and newly released documents from Russian state archives, has presented a far more nuanced picture, significantly revising the reported tank losses and the overall strategic outcomes of the battle. These revised figures indicate that Soviet losses were far greater than those of the Germans, contradicting the long-standing belief in a decisive Soviet tank victory. For example, Zamelin's research, based on detailed archival records, shows that the Red Army lost approximately 300 tanks at Prokhorovka, while German losses were significantly lower. This finding stands in stark contrast to the mythical narrative that depicted both Soviet and German forces as suffering enormous and nearly equal losses. Such revelations challenge the traditional heroic narrative and shed light on the desperate conditions faced by Soviet forces during this phase of the war. This narrative has been continually reinforced through various forms of media, from Soviet-era textbooks to contemporary Russian military parades. The emotional height of this mythologization can be seen in the personal recollections of veterans and civilians who remember the pride and tears that accompanied the victory celebrations. Despite the discrepancies between these narratives and the verified historical record, the work of modern researchers in correcting such misconceptions highlights the vital importance of archival research and open, evidence-based historical inquiry. The enduring persistence of the Prokhorovka myth in public memory can be attributed to its role in shaping post-war Soviet and later Russian national identity. Celebrated annually, the battle's traditional portrayal as a symbol of Soviet military prowess and ultimate triumph has long served as a cornerstone of educational curricula and public commemorations. As new documents have surfaced and been carefully analyzed, the historical community has begun re-evaluating the events at Prokhorovka, an effort that has influenced not only academic discourse but also public perception. Such shifts are vital, as they demonstrate a growing recognition of the importance of grounding national history in factual accuracy to cultivate a more informed and truthful public consciousness. Reflecting on the value of historical accuracy carries broader implications, extending beyond scholarship to the ways in which societies remember, learn from, and honor their past. In an age when misinformation can spread with unprecedented speed, preserving the integrity of historical narratives is more essential than ever. Doing so not only safeguards the dignity and truth of past events but also ensures that future generations understand the true complexities of war and the profound human costs that accompany it. For example, acknowledging the heavy Soviet losses at Prokhorovka does not diminish the bravery of the Red Army or the suffering of the Soviet people. Rather, it provides a fuller and more respectful understanding of their sacrifice. The revision of the Prokhorovka myth invites us to re-examine other aspects of World War II history and, indeed, the history of any conflict, with the same commitment to truth over legend. As we continue to uncover more about the past, the role of historians and educators in shaping public understanding and memory remains pivotal. By embracing narratives grounded in solid evidence rather than embellished legends, society can approach historical truth with greater maturity, ensuring that the lessons drawn from history are genuinely instructive, meaningful, and enduring. This approach not only honors those who lived through those times but also provides a foundation for future generations to build upon, ensuring that history, in its most accurate form, enlightens and guides. The Battle of Prokhorovka stands as a powerful example of how myths can overshadow realities, and why it is essential for both historians and the public to seek the truth behind the legends. Every story in history teaches us valuable lessons about strategy, courage, and the strength of the human spirit. Thanks for exploring today's story with us. Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear your perspective. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell to discover more fascinating historical stories with us. See you in the next episode, where strategy and intelligence continue to shape history.